Good morning, human geography students. This is Group 5, comprised of Will, Eric, David, and Shireen. We watched two documentaries, Inside Job and The Secret History of the Credit Card. Two very eye-opening documentaries, very informational documentaries. There's a lot of emotions going into this because it was very hard documentaries to watch as far as how the government handled all this and the repercussions that came afterwards. It was quite ridiculous. The very first signs of any big financial crisis came from Iceland, and the United States government saw this and it kind of reciprocated everything that they were doing in their government that led up to their financial crisis and put it in our economy. Now, after the Great Depression of 1930, the government and the Federal Reserves decided to say, hey, look, we're going to start regulating these banks. Things got out of hand. We're going to start looking at these banks. We're going to make sure that they're doing right by the depositors. We're going to make sure that they're making healthy investments and smart investments, and they're not doing any trickery. And that went well until 1981. In 1981, there was a deregulation under the Ronald Reagan era. The greatest president in the history of the United States, Ronald Reagan. Yeah, he made a mistake. He was talked into deregulating the banks by one major player by the name of Alan Greenspan. Now, I'm going to give you an example of deregulation here. Regulation is a cargo boat, and it's putting specific weights of whatever you want in your cargo boat. That's oil, gas, potato chips, whatever you want to put it in here, and they're putting it in a specific cargo bay, the bay where they're supposed to go, and this is what keeps the weight distribution even and keeps the boat afloat. It's an example of regulating things. Deregulation is just coming on this cargo boat and just putting any type of weight anywhere you want. It doesn't matter. Putting a 15-pound bag of potato chips in bay 5 when it really should be in bay 2. Putting another 150-pound bag of potato chips in bay 4 when it really should go in bay 1. And this kind of, it unevens the weight distribution and it makes the boat sink. It's an example of deregulation. Now, the deregulating of banks, it was boosting the economy. Don't get it wrong. It boosted the economy all the way up until 2000s. And that's the thing. They just didn't know when to quit. They just did not know when to quit. An example of this would be the housing bubble. I don't know if you ever heard of this term. I'm sure much of you have. But the housing bubble, the reason why it made it expand so rapidly and so big was because bankers and banks were giving faulty loans to people, which means they were giving loans that they knew weren't affordable to people that wouldn't be able to even afford them if they tried. And what they were doing was they were making these loans look affordable for like the first 4 or 5 years, and then after that 6th or 7th year mark hit, the interest rate would hit, and they would even spike the interest on it. And these loans weren't able to be paid at all whatsoever, and that's what led to the bubble bursting in 2008. This is what led to the big financial crisis, the big bailout, was because these 6 and 7 year mark hits on people's loans finally came about, and these people weren't able to afford them. They went to from paying $500 to $800 mortgages to paying $2,000 to $5,000 mortgages. It was stuff that they just couldn't afford. They didn't save any money. They never thought any of things like this were going to happen, but the banks did, and the bankers knew. All of them knew. The government even knew. And the thing is the bankers were partying with all this money. They were getting millions and millions of dollars off these faulty loans, and they were partying. They were partying on the yachts. And no repercussions ever came of this, man. And that's what's so bad about it, is because the banks, the CEOs of the banks, they knew that this stuff was going to happen. And a major local problem that happened out of this was people lost their homes. They had to go move in with their mom and dad, or they had to live out on the street. A lot of companies had to downsize. Banks went out of business. Globally, 10 million migrants lost their job. I mean, even companies around the world started going out of business because of this. This affected not only the United States, but it affected the rest of the world as well. Now, the secret history of the credit card. Seahawks Falls, South Dakota is a gold mine for banks. I'll tell you the reason why it's a gold mine for banks. Is because they have a post office there that's huge. It should be in Texas, but it's in South Dakota. It's so big, and it's it's a very useful tool for banks and especially credit card companies as well. And one of the banks that heard wind of this gigantic post office was Citibank, and Citibank was about to go out of business. They were out of New York City, and they called up Seahawks Falls, South Dakota, and they said, "Yo, Seahawks Falls, do y'all want to stop being like a cattle auctioneering place? Do y'all want to stop being a one-horse town? Do y'all want to start being like a boom town, like a industrialized town? Well, we can do that for you, and we can bring you thousands and thousands of jobs. Just what you need to do is release the cap that you have set on your interest rates as far as your loans and your credit card loans go, and we'll just keep on bringing banks and business into your town." Seahawks Falls was like, "All right, no problem," and they passed this thing called the Marquette Bill. The Marquette Bill deregulated the interest rates on credit cards and loans, which means credit card companies and banks could do whatever they wanted with their interest rates. Now, there was this man by the name of Andrew Carr that came into the game, and he said, "Hey, banks and credit card companies, listen to this. Let's put a 0% or a 2% or a 5% interest rate on our advertisement on our envelope that we send to people in the mail, and let's see if what happens with these credit cards." And they just started catching like wildfire. Everybody saw that 0% interest on the envelope, and they just started opening up all these credit cards. Well, what Andrew Carr did not put on the envelope was, "Hey, if you go late on any of your payments within those first 6 months of 0% interest or 2% interest or 5% interest, your interest rate is going to go all the way up to 19% or 25% or 29%. And that's the deregulation of interest rates, is that they could put any type of interest rate they wanted to, and they could use any excuse they wanted to whatsoever. And being late on your first 6 payments or however many payments is a good excuse to hike your interest rate up. Now, that's the reason why you have to read your credit card contract, because it does state in the credit card contract that they can raise your interest rate. They never say how high they can raise it, and usually it's 19, 20, 25, 29%. It's a ridiculous amount. And you actually have to watch for the fees as well. You have to watch for the late fees. You have to watch for the convenience fees. It's all these crazy fees that they put on there too. They never tell you about this. This never is actually spoken to you. You're supposed to read that little tiny word, 5 billion worded document that comes with your credit card that nobody ever reads. But this is stuff that's in that contract, and it's messed up because none of these consumers know any information as far as their credit card goes. And like, there was this one guy in the film that he had a credit card with his credit card company for 6 years straight, never was late on any payment whatsoever, was doing really well. And the credit card company found out that in 1985 he had went late on one of his credit card bills from a different credit card company, and they said, "Hey, he was late on that bill with a different credit card company. We're going to hike his interest rate all the way up to 19%. And I'm talking about the guy was mad, mad, mad. I'm telling you, deregulation leads to being taken advantage of. You just have to remember that, and that is the main focal point between these two films. Is the government knew all this was going on, and when the repercussions came, nobody was ever blamed for it. If anything, the CEOs of these banks and the people that were supposed to be blamed for this problem actually either got a raise, a severance package, or some type of money from this, or some type of job. So people got hooked up even after the crisis happened. Deregulation is a very, very bad thing. You just have to keep this in mind.